Shalom. My name is Yair Davidiy. I'm speaking to you from Jerusalem, from the land of Israel. We are now about to discuss an aspect concerning the lost 10 tribes of Israel. We have found the lost 10 tribes amongst Western nations. We have proven it. We have proven it from the Bible, we have proven it from rabbinical sources, and we have proven it from secular evidence, from mythology, archaeology, from any whatsoever field that may have something pertinent to say on the subject. We have looked into it and we have found evidence confirming it that the lost 10 tribes are amongst Western nations. They are not alone in those regions, but they are there. That is where the lost 10 tribes are. And amongst the Western nations wherein we find the lost 10 tribes, we find a predominant element from the tribes of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh amongst the English-speaking peoples. And we have found in the British Isles, we have found divisions or distinctions, one may say, between those inhabitants of the British Isles who went to the USA, and also those from Europe also went to the USA, and those who stayed behind, and from which areas they came from, and also social groupings and so on, so that overall approximately we may appertain to which section of the Israelite tribes they belonged. To which sections of the tribes of Joseph. Joseph was 2 tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, and we have found that amongst the British and the Australians and New Zealanders and people from Canada and other areas, that there's a preponderance of elements from Ephraim. This is based on the names of clans, or the names of clans which are similar to tribes in different sections of the British Isles. And also not only that, but after we have established that, we've also applied national characteristics pertaining to Ephraim, compared them to the USA, and we've done the same for characteristics pertaining to Ephraim, pertaining to the British and their offshoots. And we've done quite a deep study in this area. So, and this is not what we're speaking about at the moment, but this is like an overall, a background, as you could, one may say, to what we're about to speak about. We're about to speak about the fact that these peoples are from Joseph, and that they benefited the world, and in doing so they were fulfilling the attributes of Joseph. And Joseph, as you remember, Joseph was a favorite son of his father. His brothers were jealous of him, so they made it out as if he had been murdered, and in effect they sold him into slavery. He was taken down into Egypt. In Egypt he became the de facto ruler of the country. And under the guidance of God Almighty, he saved Egypt. He saved Egypt and all of the world, all of the known world, all the countries around about, from famine, from starvation. He saved them. And Pharaoh had appointed him over all of the kingdom. And it says in Genesis, we see in Genesis 42, chapter 42, beginning from verse 6, now Joseph was ruler over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. Joseph was the ruler over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And so too, the descendants of Joseph, they have traded with all the peoples of the earth. The descendants of Joseph, they have made international trade possible. They have saved a good portion of the world population from starvation and disease. And it would had been prophesied that the lost 10 tribes, they would be seafarers, that they would be represented by the lion and the unicorn, as Brit-Am was, see Numbers 23, 22, 24. That they would be a blessing to others, as it says, and you shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. 26:4, you shall be a blessing. 12:2, and you shall all families of the earth be blessed. Genesis 12:3, seeing that Abraham shall become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. Genesis 18:18, and in your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Genesis 22:18. And so too we find Isaiah 61:9, and their seed shall be known among the Gentiles, and offspring among the people. All they that see them shall acknowledge them, that they are the seed which the Lord has blessed. Isaiah 61:9, as we said. So we see that from this, that the lost 10 tribes to Israel, that section of Israel that went into exile, was destined to be a blessing to all of the nations of the earth. And other verses tell us that they would rule over the peoples of the earth, that they would be the greatest military power in the earth. And this is what the British and after them the USA were. And so we'll just look at this because it reflects upon these biblical passages. We are told in Micah 5, the remnant of Jacob will be among the nations, among many peoples, like a lion among the beasts of the forests, like a young lion among flocks of sheep, which if he passes through tramples down and tears, and there is none to rescue. Your hand will be lifted up against your adversaries, and all your enemies will be cut off. The sin of the lost in tribes will become the battle axe of the Almighty, see Jeremiah 51:19. It is the policeman of the globe. This is what they did become. And we find this first in the British Empire, and after that in the USA, and in its international spread, influence of the USA. The British Empire's height covered a quarter of the globe. 1/4 of the world's surface was was under the rulership of the British Empire. And a fifth of its population, 20% of the people in the world, were directly ruled by the British Empire. This is without counting all the people around about and along the sides whom they also influenced, and who in effect had to do what they were requested to do when necessary. So this was a very powerful empire. It spread all over the world. And the British culture, they spread their culture and their values and their ideals and their standards of behaviour and attitudes to life everywhere they went, and they were very effective in this. And they did this through their navy power rather more than through the military. They had a very small army. In fact, Bismarck, the chief chancellor of the Prussian Empire, which was in many ways a rival to the British Empire, when he heard how large the British army was, he joked. He said, if they ever invaded Europe, I would send the local police force of Berlin to arrest them. That's how relatively small it was. But they had a large navy, and they made sure as much as possible that this navy would be twice as large as anything else that could come up against it. And they're also wealthy compared to other nations. They had 2% of the world's population, but 30% of the global gross product. The product, 30% came from the British Empire, 20% of the world trade, 40% of world manufacturing trade passed through their hands. And Neil Ferguson, an historian of some note, he has said that the British Empire is responsible for the worldwide spread of the English language, for banking, for the common law, for the Protestant faith, for team sports, a limited state representative government, and the idea of liberty. And so these are all positive aspects. There are also negative ones, but we won't go into them at the moment. Enough, you should know about them, however, and on another opportunity we might discuss them. We should also note that only the British, but also the French and the Dutch also had large empires. The Dutch had the Dutch East Indies, Indonesia, Ceylon, other areas, places in South America, and other places. And the French had a large empire. They had places, islands in the Pacific Ocean and Indian Ocean, bases and outlets here and there. They had all Indochina, also belonged to the French, and a large section of West Africa was also French, and other areas. And they too spread their civilization. They spread aspects of their civilization and their values and their ideals, which in some way or other all ultimately relate back to those of the Bible. And amongst the French and amongst the Dutch, we also find strong elements of the Lost 10 Tribes of Europe. These two were from the Lost Tribes of Europe. Amongst the French, we find that the Rubent have been predominant, to be given as to place his emphasis upon the French people, one could say, his imprint. And amongst the Dutch, we find the tribe of Zebulun to have been dominant, but as well as there being other tribes, including those of Joseph amongst them. At all events, Britain in 1860 produced more than half the world's iron. At that time, iron was a note of economic power. The production of iron was a parameter by which relative industrial might could be gauged. This had gone down by 1940 to less than 10%. By 1914, it had gone down to less than 10%. That is less than 50 years later. But Britain had invested all over the world, including in Canada, in India, and Hong Kong. And the fruits of its investments kept coming back to it and buoying it up and helping it until this very day. This is what gives the Britain much more power than statistically it should have. That because we don't, not all of the input from investments of British banks and institutions in the past are written up in black and white for the public view. At all events, Britain was great, and then America came along, and America had been advancing alongside Britain, or as if to say, in many ways, the British Empire cast a protective shield over the world, in which America could develop without interference from other sources, at least not serious interference. America perhaps did not need this protective shield, or perhaps it did, but nevertheless it benefited from it. They lived alongside each other and they helped each other. America from the very beginning supplemented British power in many ways, and the British protected America and helped America, and they coordinated their policies. Together with this, there were periods of fiction, there were rivalries, and sometimes ill feeling bordered on hostility, and there were minor wars here and there that did break out between the two, and these at certain stages threatened to become much more serious, but they did not. At all events, America was coming up all the time, and the Americans were coming up alongside Britain. America began to overtake Britain at an early stage, to pass her in its economic production, in its wealth and its power, and eventually America superseded Britain. There was, at the time, people were afraid that war would break out between the two, and there was a risk of this. There was a risk of war breaking out, but it did not. And in the end, Britain saw that the lesser of all evils was to allow America to take its place, and to live with it, and to live alongside it, and to accommodate it, which is what happened. And America, as we said, America was coming up. America from a very early stage had began to give a blessing, to produce a blessing for all the peoples of the earth. The price of wheat went down by about 20 to 35% in Europe. It diminished whilst the demand was growing all the time due to the increase of population. But nevertheless, due to the America's development and its agricultural bounty, it was able to meet the demand, and not only that, to lower the prices. And the USA had now, the USA sometime has had 5% of the world's population, but it generates between 20 to 30% of world output, and it's been doing this for the last 125 years. The US economy has been the largest in the world since the middle of the 1880s, and is today the same. The USA has bases all over the world today, bases in every country of the earth, nearly, or very many countries of the earth. The bases of the USA have are in effect a continuation of the British Empire. The British Empire was based in many ways upon gaining control of strategic thoroughfares, of areas that give it a potential entrance into hostile regions, or control of seafares and or control of trade routes and so on, such as the Suez Canal, Singapore, Hong Kong, and so on. And the USA has repeated this. The USA has repeated this pattern by gaining control of bases throughout the world, which also, in times of emergency, give it an advantage point of being able to come in against elements that might be antagonistic to it in the case of hostilities. The USA has 197,000 uniformed personnel on these bases, an equal number of dependents. It has 766 bases in foreign countries. It's the power, it's the world power. The US dominates at every level. The military dominates. The military of the USA dominates on the land, on the air, and space. The USA accounts for more than 50% of all global spending on defence. The USA also acts as the policeman of the globe, as the UK used to. as the Britain used to. The USA intervenes everywhere and anywhere, on the side, usually on the side of humanitarian causes, to rectify wrongs, to straighten out local disputes that have become too bloodthirsty, and for all other reasons. Sometimes the USA makes mistakes in this region, but on the whole its motives are pure ones, or are correct ones, and on the whole it does well. I should make a brief comparison between the USA and Britain. We saw that the USA has on its basis 197,000 people working for it, at least, plus 81,000 locals, whereas the British Empire at its height was run by only 6,000 souls. The British Empire was run by 6,000 people, whereas the USA, for bases, it's not for countries, needs almost more than 200,000 people. The times have changed, the situation has changed, but nevertheless it's good to keep things in proportion. When we begin to condemn the British for their imperialism and their colonialism, we see it wasn't so simple, that they did a lot of good, and this is what the situation required at the time, and they were successful at it. The British ruled India with about 2,000 full-time white civil servants, and also with 20,000 soldiers, many of whom were Indian. The British had 20,000 soldiers in India. Most of them were Indian. 1/3 were white, British or Irish. Irish were very important also in the British Army. 1/3 of the British Army were actually from Ireland. And they ruled over 300 million Indians. And they ruled India relatively well, and most of the inhabitants of India were pleased with their rule, insofar as they recognised that the rule of the British was preferable to that of their own local princes and dignitaries. The British also benefited from India, and they still benefited from India, but they didn't exploit India to the same extent as the Dutch and the Germans did in their empires, or even the French. The British, but they took something out of India and they put something back. They increased irrigation projects, they increased farming, they increased their food supplies in India. They eliminated human sacrifice and all kinds of perversions that had taken hold of the society. They unified the country, they gave it communications and transport, and they made business opportunities for the middle class to develop it. And on the whole, the British had a positive influence on India, and the Indian population grew by about a factor of 10, by 10 times over since the British came into to when the British went out. The population of India increased by 10 times, if not more, whereas before then it had remained stagnant for hundreds of years due to diseases, due to famine, due to wars, due to all kinds of troubles. They had never developed. The British gave them peace, they gave them prosperity, relatively speaking, and they gave them food. And even though the population increased by leaps and bounds, they were stronger and more healthier than they previously had been. So too the USA. The USA has not been an exploiter. It has benefited from its position, but it has also done a lot of good. We had the Green Revolution. Green Revolution took place in the 1940s, 1960s, and in effect it was the application of science and scientific projects under the direction of the Rockefeller Institution, the Ford Foundation, and other philanthropic bodies from America that paid the experts to find seeds and varieties of rice and so on that would be resistant to plagues, resistant to pests, and that would be able to, and that were easier to grow and develop. And this, on the whole, was successful. These efforts were successful, and consequently, millions, if not hundreds of millions of people have remained alive in Asia, in South America, in the Philippines, all over the world, all over in third world countries, due to this, due to the Green Revolution. And not only have they remained alive and not died from famine and as they would previously have done, but they have been healthier alongside it. They've grown up physically more robust than they previously would have been. This is all thanks to America and to America's largesse and beneficence. The USA in many ways is a continuation of the British Empire. The USA's characteristics typical of Manasseh. Manasseh in the Bible, we find Manasseh in the Bible, even though it was second to Ephraim as far as the blessings were concerned. On the ground level, we see that Ephraim had his own piece of territory, whereas Manasseh had two sections, one in the east and one in the west, to a much larger extent of territory that belonged to it, and also its population was much greater. Manasseh was always bigger than Ephraim. And so too the USA is much bigger than Britain and all its offshoots. And now things are changing somewhat. China is coming up, India is coming up, Japan is coming up. Europe is in the short term is a rival to the USA, and it might be able to cause some damage, we don't know, but Europe too is suffering from a low level of population increase. So too the citizens of the USA of European descent, from Britain, from Europe in general, are not having enough children. They are being replaced by others in the country from other areas, and this in the long run could be to the detriment of the USA. And one of the reasons on why these Israelite elements within the USA are not bringing enough children to the world is because they have departed from biblical values. They have gone away from the Bible, or they never were sufficiently adhesive, sufficiently involved in the Bible as they should have been, and therefore they are not bringing enough children into the world, and therefore their blessings and their situation in the world is in danger. And therefore, in order to save themselves, for the sake of themselves and for the sake of humanity, they should return to the Bible, because only through the Bible are we enabled to do what we have to do and to understand what we are and to go in the will along the pathway that the Almighty has set before us. Thank you very much. May the God of Israel bless you.